Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. The International Energy Agency is very pleased to welcome you to this new webinar in the IEA Africa University series. My name is Yasmin Samantar, and I'm an Africa Energy Analyst at the IEA in our World Energy Outlook division. I'm very happy to be here today to talk about a very important and interesting topic, which is bioenergy data. During this presentation, my colleague Zakia Adam, Statistics Manager within our Energy Data Center, will first talk you through some of the essential elements of bioenergy statistics. This is what we deem to be some of the most fundamental information required for dealing with biofuels data in the energy sector. Then she'll pass the floor to our colleagues from FAO, who will walk you through the work they're doing on wood fuel production in Africa and the information that they have now, as well as opportunities for collecting more. Before giving the floor to Zakia, Ashley, and Zhao, I'd like to set the scene and say a few words on the IEA for those who may not be familiar with our institution. The IEA was created in 1974 after the first oil crisis. It's an intergovernmental organization that aims at facilitating the coordination of energy policies of its member countries and beyond. Its initial mandate was to ensure the security of energy supply, mainly oil, in order to support economic growth. Over the last 50 years, however, the IEA has expanded its expertise to all energy sources. We collect data and do analyses on almost all countries in the world, as well as in the energy sector and in all technologies. For Africa, we work extensively with AFRIC, for example, but also with local governments, ministries, utilities, and we've managed to train over 300 statisticians, analysts, and modelers from across the continent. And in our institution, we have about 300 people working there today, based in Paris, but traveling all around the world. We organize bilateral discussions with governments and high-level summits that include our annual African Union and IEA Ministerial Summit each year that we host with the African Union, be it on the African continent or at headquarters in Paris. Our summits convene ministers from across the continent to discuss key topics. Last year, it was the effect of the pandemic on energy access, and this year we'll be discussing many other aspects. We work extensively on climate issues and clean energy transitions, especially now in advance of COP26, which will take place in November. And through our regular trainings, we work closely with many countries to help them improve their data collection and build models. With the support of the European Union, the IEA is currently implementing a capacity reinforcement program for 10 sub-Saharan African countries. In this program, for the moment, we do online courses for each country, but also several other activities, as well as bilateral work with each government. We're hoping to start doing in-country trainings, which is something we're very excited about, as soon as the situation allows us. Last but not least, if you want to be kept informed of our activities, please do not hesitate to join our WhatsApp group and LinkedIn community. If you're not a part of them, please send a message in the chat below, where one of my colleagues will gladly assist you. Thank you very much. Now I'll pass the floor to Zakia, who will dive into biofuels. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Yasmin. So good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today to talk about this very important and interesting topic, which is bioenergy data. Before we dig into the subject, let us first start looking more closely at the definition of solid biofuels in coherence with the international methodologies, the international recommendation of energy statistics from the United Nations. So solid biofuels, it covers organic, non-fossil material of biological origin. We can make a distinction between primary and secondary solid biofuels. For primary production, it is the capture or extraction of fuels from natural energy flows within the national territory in a form that is suitable for use. So we refer to them as primary products. Yeah. So for secondary production, it's the manufacture of energy products through the process of a transformation of other fuels, whether primary or secondary, such as charcoal. What is very important here to remember is that only the amounts that are specifically used for energy purposes, which is a very small part of the total, are included in energy statistics. Now, let us put things quickly into perspectives and see how energy demand has evolved over the past years. In 1919, wood accounted for around 1/3 of total energy demand, followed by coal. If you go further in the past, wood must have accounted for most of the energy consumption in the world. Over the years, we see how energy demand transitioned to oil, natural gas, etc., with technology developments and people starting to consume other fuels. The share of wood decreased a lot at the global level since 1919 from 30% in 1919 to around 4% in 2018. What is interesting to observe is that wood total consumption has increased in absolute terms in the energy mix. Since 2000, as developing countries move away from the traditional use of biomass, the absolute consumption drops, but wood consumption, it still remains present in 2040 based on the IEA projections in the stated policy scenario. So even if the energy mix it diversifies even more, there will still be some traditional use of biomass. And so it means that we have to continue making efforts to reduce consumption. Now, if we compare regions in 2018, we see that in OECD countries, we have a lot of oil consumption followed by gas, electricity, etc. In non-OECD countries, the picture starts changing and we have more coal and biofuels and less oil and gas. If we go to Africa, we see that the share of biofuels in total final consumption, it increases to over 50%, and in sub-Saharan Africa, it is even more. Bioenergy, it's the largest source of energy in sub-Saharan Africa today, and it accounts for 3/4 of final energy consumption. In sub-Saharan Africa, the biofuel consists mostly of primary solid biofuels such as wood. As we all know, the use of solid biofuels is not without consequence for the health of the population. There are many other drawbacks of using biomass. Women also suffer from wood collection as they spend several hours daily picking biomass. If the use of biofuels woods is not done in a sustainable way, there are also negative impacts on the environment. Therefore, tracking biofuels production and consumption is key for countries in sub-Saharan Africa. In this figure, you can see the split of biofuels and waste of the previous figure. As you can see, in OECD, we have more modern biofuels such as bioliquids, biogases, and waste. If we look at Africa, we see that the total of biofuels and waste, it consists mainly of primary solid biofuels, which is firewood, and charcoal that is considered as traditional use of biomass. One key challenge is that it is difficult to estimate non-market goods, and here we are comparing the percentage of biofuels to other fuels that are all marketed. The consequence of that is that the clean energy transition policies that target fossils via pricing can have perverse effects. That is, we increase the unsustainable use of non-marketed fuels. We have already said a lot about biofuels consumption, but in which sectors are they consumed? In OECD, less than half is used in residential sector, mostly for heating purposes, and we have a big use in industrial sectors for raising heat for industrial processes. But if we go to Africa, most of the solid biofuels is used in the residential sector and for cooking purposes. This graph, it shows household consumption for cooking purposes in rural versus urban areas. And here we can see clearly that there are some differences between rural and urban consumption patterns for fuels. In urban areas, we have a bit more fuel mix for cooking, where we have some use of LPG, kerosene, and electricity. In some countries like Angola, Cote d'Ivoire, and DR Congo, we already have over 50% of households using LPG for cooking in urban areas. In urban areas also, even if modern fuels can be accessible, we still might have the issue of affordability, as these modern fuels are more expensive than wood. So even if alternatives exist, people still continue to use biofuels. In rural areas, it is still primarily fuel wood and charcoal. Here, there is often an accessibility issue in rural areas for other sources of energy, such as LPG, and so firewood is usually the most accessible fuel for cooking. I will end this first part of the presentation with this last slide on what are the common barriers. So as you have seen, we have the issue of commercial versus non-commercial biofuels, but we also need to have a correct sample. And so it is important to work with the statistical office of your country to have a representative sample. It is important to collect information on the different type of solid biofuels used, what are the different type of wood use in the regions, the moisture content, the net calorific values. Also, we need to take into account the cultural difference, because there are different ways of cooking, etc. There's also the type of different cook stoves used, and the different cook stoves use different amount of fuels. So the type of appliance is an important information. We need to cover both commercial and non-commercial biofuels, including charcoal. And for non-commercial, it's important to track how much wood is picked, the amount that are resold on black markets, and regulated charcoal production. And it's also very important to understand how charcoal has been produced in order to estimate properly the fuel input. And for this, you need to know the type of kiln that has been used to produce the charcoal. And that's it on my side. I thank you very much for your attention. And I now pass over to Miss Ashley Steele, who is a forestry officer at FAO, and she will give you an overview of the FAO work on wood fuel. Thank you very much, and I pass the floor to Ashley.
Thank you very much. It was a great start. I'm happy that you began with the importance of statistics and data and sampling, or that you ended. Let me take a minute to share my screen properly. Fantastic. Does everyone see it? I see Zach nodding. Okay, super. So I want to begin also with thanking all the colleagues and experts who contributed to this presentation, and begin with the importance of data. I think sometimes we just take this issue that there aren't enough data sort of for granted, but why do we really need data? We need data that can be disaggregated at the local level. We need data that can be used to create estimates that have indications of how sure we are, indications of uncertainty. And sometimes these data can be complicated or expensive to collect. So just a moment to think why we need them so much, because we want our policies and our decisions to be based on the real conditions in the world, the conditions of natural resources, of people. And in my view, it's the official statistics that bring it together, that enable the policies and the real conditions to meet and to solve these kind of puzzles that we have. So wood fuel is one of the most important items that we need more data on. If you were at the AFREC workshop last week, you noticed that many countries don't have data. And here we are with the Sustainable Development Goals. These guide so much of our work in moving forward with sustainable development. And there are 5 different targets that are tightly tied to wood fuel. And at FAO, we work on wood fuel, not I don't work on all of biofuels, so I'll be limiting my conversation to wood fuel. But if we are going to track our progress towards any of these goals, we need to know something about how much wood fuel is consumed. So it's involved with as you all know, right? Air pollution and health, unpaid domestic work, as Zakia already mentioned, renewable energy and the share of it, sustainable management of natural resources, and of course it's linked to deforestation. We have also the global forest goals. For those of you who are more involved with energy than forestry, we have, of course, our own set of goals. And the United Nations Strategic Plan for Forests was developed to take us to 2030, and it includes 6 goals, 26 targets, 21 indicators, and indicator 10, the one that's important to us today, is the share of wood-based energy in total final energy consumption. So FAO has created a roadmap for improving data availability in order to track this indicator. But of course, we need more and better data. That's really the first step in that roadmap, is improved modeling, improved capacity building, improved data collection. And that was agreed at an expert workshop with quite a few participants. So today I'm going to talk about the data available through FAOstat. And what is FAOstat? The ongoing work at FAO in model building. I'm going to move on to talk about household surveys and really touch on some statistical principles that we need to think about if we are conducting a household survey, or if we are hiring other people to conduct a household survey, or if we are evaluating data from a household survey. And thinking ahead to communication of uncertainty. I think that's very important when we start thinking how we want policymakers to use our data. And then Shah, also from the same team in FAO, he will give a few examples of ongoing field projects and share his new database and platform for knowledge sharing. FAO has been working on wood energy for over 50 years. So as an institution, we have a long, long history. I would like to acknowledge that my background is in statistics. It's in forestry statistics, in survey design, sampling, data analysis, and communication of data. So I've only been working on wood energy for about 2 years now. But I hope I can bring the statistical perspective and also acknowledge that there's lots to learn. FAO works on many aspects of wood energy, on knowledge sharing, on awareness building and capacity development. We work on how those data and capacities can be used to understand policies and to improve policies. We have a strong statistics database that I'll share in a minute, and we also provide technical support to field projects. And this is just an example here of all the publications that FAO produces. I bring your attention to the Forest Product Statistics Yearbook that comes from the FAOstat database I'm going to talk about, and also to this guidance document for incorporating module on how to collect wood fuel data in ongoing surveys that I'll talk about with quite a bit more detail. So just before we dig into the data, a picture of what wood fuel really consists of. It really is a very diverse topic. It goes all the way from this household cooking, very informal collection, difficult to track, perhaps not sold or even bartered, collected and used at the same place, to wood charcoal, which is often collected in or produced informally or not well tracked, sometimes illegally, and often sold in units that are very difficult to measure. And then wood fuel that's used, in almost all countries around the world. Perhaps it's sold, but only very informally. And in the first cases, we are really imagining issues with human health, women's labor, and deforestation. And then when we move all the way over to wood pellets, we're starting to imagine a sustainable alternative to less sustainable fuel sources. And these products tend to be marketed and produced formally, and we have much better data on them. So as we see the data, we have to think about a very wide range of issues in data availability and in underlying goals. So what is FAOstat? I've referred to it a few times. This is FAO's very large online database. It produces global, regional, and national data on forest product statistics, and one of the main products are wood fuel. So you can download data here. It's the website if you're interested. And I want to take a pause here while you're looking at this cool database, just to note that FAO reports data on wood fuel and wood charcoal production. In fact, the wood fuel production is removals of roundwood that are used for fuel, and then wood charcoal is production. We can go between production and consumption by including information on export and import. And for many countries where there's very little trade or no trade, production is assumed to be equal to consumption. And I notice in my presentation, I just need to jump back and forth between production and consumption, the most proper term at the moment. But generally, I will be assuming that production equals consumption, or if that assumption isn't quite correct, we can navigate that with the trade data that's available to us. So what do we have at FAO Stat for wood fuel? This is really important to understand. So FAO Stat has data for 217 countries. For only 72 of these countries do we have non-repeating official data for more than or equal to 10 years since 1960. So FAO does not collect data itself. FAO receives data for FAO Stat from country correspondents. Some of those country correspondents also report, especially in Africa, to ITTO, the International Tropical Timber Organization. And they report data on a wide range of forest products. When the country reports them to us, we call that official data. And when they don't report it to us, we either look for unofficial figures or we use a model to estimate wood fuel production. So for 145 countries across the world, there are less than 10 years of official data since 1960. And these are often the countries with a very high reliance on wood fuel. This same lack of underlying data, I think, came up at the AFRIC workshop last year. Last year probably also, but also last week. So let's look at the global trends to understand the really big picture and why we have to fill gaps. So you might say, why even estimate something if we don't have data? Because we want to understand those trends. We want to be able to produce important policy driving graphs like the one Zakia also showed. And we can see here that since 1961, Europe has been quite steady in its total production of wood fuel. We see a slight increase in the Americas, a slight decrease in Asia, and then this very strong increase in Africa. This increase is also very smooth, and this gives us maybe a hint that a lot of this information is based on modeled estimates, perhaps per capita estimates. So we automatically see a very strong increase where we see a strong population increase. Just for perspective across the regions, there are 58 countries in Africa, and up until 2018, 90% of the values were estimated. But in 2018, only 75%. So there are a lot of countries who are beginning to provide more and more official data. And I think that's really an important trend that we can build on. Let's just zoom into these data a little bit. These are the data I just showed you, but for a subset of African countries. And where you see a dotted line, FAO is supplying data based on estimates or unofficial figures, but only the official figures are in dots. So we can see that only Ghana, Zambia, and Liberia have lots of official data of these couple of countries, and many of the others are mainly estimates. Although often there are some official figures sprinkled in that give us a bit of confidence that the estimation procedure is not too far off. And then, of course, we use those official estimates to refine the estimation procedure as we go forward. I think looking at Senegal is very insightful. So if we look just at wood fuel, non-coniferous, because it's the most important kind, wood fuel production in Senegal, we see an increase and a very smooth trend. It really indicates that most of this is estimated from an underlying model, and you can see this orange color here suggests an FAO estimate. When we look at the charcoal production, we see a flat trend and then followed by a whole bunch of official data. I assume that what's happened is that there was a project and Senegal was able to produce official estimates year after year for quite some time. And we see this number jumping around a little bit because in reality, when we estimate a number from field work or from data, it's estimated with a bit of uncertainty, and therefore it tends to jump around. And we shouldn't be too afraid of this. This is the way estimates look. And we're going to talk a bit about that at the end of the workshop today. At the end of this project or this effort, we went back to estimating data when data were not produced. And that was again with basically a constant that seems to have captured pretty well the trend in those more empirical estimates. At some point around 2010, somebody at FAO or somebody in Senegal found an unofficial figure that suggested we should revise our estimate up. We revised it up, and then we continued to repeat. So it gives you an idea of how those data are produced inside the system. So given all of these so many data are built with a model, we've decided it's time to update the model. The previous model was built in 2005. At that time, only 49 countries had official data for more than 10 years. And now we're up to 78 countries. So there has been this huge increase in official data. We also have a lot more data that perhaps isn't reported to FAO, and I'll share that with you in a minute. And of course, we have many new statistical tools. So mixed effects models, random forest models, classification algorithms. I think we can improve on the estimation procedure from a technical level too. Let's hope statistics has improved in the past 15 years. So one of the first things we did is to initiate online data search country by country. It's taken about 1.5 years to identify all the data that exists on wood fuel production or consumption. So you can see that for Africa, there were 8 countries with more than 10 years of FAO-stat data since 1990. We're starting in 1990. And we searched 49 countries one by one. We found information for 46 of them, and we found 943 total data points. The places we searched were the peer-reviewed literature, official government websites, and a series of 10 very large international organizations, all their project reports by country, and also a series of non-government organizations. So you can imagine the poor interns who spent a half a day to 4 days per country searching for data, but it was well worth it. We've also gone to Africa and found data for an additional 1,000 data points, bringing our total to 3,448 data points globally that we can now use to build a revised model. And we'll be working with Africa to understand these data points. I believe most of them are estimated from energy budgets, the way Zakia shared, and so we may use them in a slightly different way in model building than we use data we believe come from empirical estimates. I will just let you look at this for a minute. I'll walk you through very gently. But another piece of work that we finally completed is an expert group. We've brought together experts from IEA, from UNECE, from UNSTAT, from WHO, universities, statisticians, wood energy experts to build this, what I call a conceptual model. So what is driving wood fuel production? So we make sure that when we build a statistical model, we're capturing the right elements. The things that I have put in bold are things we think we have some data for, and actually I see that I can bold a few others. So we found data on life expectancy, and this Gini coefficient is a measure of inequity. So our conceptual model looks generally like this, that the amount of people, space, and money that you have drives your cooking and heating and industrial needs, and that drives your demand. And you may see this demand reflected also in things like forests, and forests may also perhaps impact the demand in that there's less availability of other fuels. And we have a little bit of that kind of economic indicators that reflect availability of other fuels. And we account for trade here, as I mentioned. So let's talk a little bit about collecting data. FAO has produced this wood fuel supplementary module. You can download this online. It's guidance for incorporating a wood fuel module into existing surveys to help countries collect reliable and comparable data, comparable over time or comparable with other countries. It's particularly focused on production and consumption in the informal sector and intended to provide data that can be used to track progress over time. There's many possible goals to be achieved with any wood fuel data collection program. The module covers a lot of different types of goals, such as understanding the effects on forests, understanding when there's scarcity, when there's lack of wood fuel might be leading to inability to heat or cook, the proportion of households using other forms of clean cooking and heating fuels, energy, time and money, especially the gender issue. I'm going to focus here on the part of the module that's looking at the quantifying wood fuel used in the household sector. So a couple considerations for household surveys. And I'm imagining that many of you might be considering whether a household survey is necessary, what information you would get from a household survey, what you should, you might be considering running one or commissioning one or paying for one. What are the kinds of questions you should ask of the National Statistics Office when they are designing the survey? Or perhaps questions you should ask when you're using data that come from an existing survey. The first is to understand the population of interest. This is the population that you're sampling and also the population to which you can make inference. For the data that FAO needs, which are national data, we really need the whole country to be the population of interest, all households. So that includes rural and urban households, and no matter how much fuel they consume. Measuring the quantities of fuel wood carefully, and especially the moisture content, often requires the purchase and the transportation of very expensive equipment or more expensive equipment. So sometimes these quantities can be measured in a subset of households. You might be able to get a large sample that looks at the most inexpensive information, a subset of that, perhaps quantifying consumption, and a subset of that looking at moisture content. So the module can be included in all of some existing everywhere that a particular household survey or an agricultural survey is being conducted, or just in a subset. And that sample size that's chosen is going to depend on the budget, on the objectives. The sample size will determine the precision of your final estimate. So how sure you are of your final estimate and what you can say about it, which I will talk about in a minute. And it also determines the level of disaggregation. So if we're thinking about a national estimate only, we need one sample size. If we also want to make regional, reasonable estimates for each region, we need a sample size that's adequate in each of those subregions. So here's just an example of a household survey, the kinds of information that are collected. This is the household survey that's in the guidance document from FAO. We look at either weight or volume of wood. It's both measured and estimated, and what that wood is used for. I want to point out that simple proportions are also a start in collecting information at the national or subnational level. And this information can be collected in a very simple and relatively inexpensive way. So one might collect the proportion of households using wood for cooking, using wood for heating, collecting wood from the forest, or of using different kinds of cooking technologies. Proportions are much simpler and cheaper than quantitative estimates of the amount of wood fuel used, but they alone can't provide the kind of estimates of total wood consumed for energy or amount of energy produced from wood. They can't contribute to understanding the wood energy, the wood fuel used and produced at the national level. They can be used, though, to provide some of those excellent statistics that Zakia presented, looking at the proportion of how the mix of fuels is shifting over time. They can help us transition some sub-data at local levels to national estimates. If we have per capita estimates in some places, and then we know how many people, what proportion of people are using wood fuel in another area, we can merge this two information. And proportions can help us to design a good sampling plan. A couple of pilots have been conducted of the FAO approach, and just to review a few of the lessons learned as you imagine what might work for you in collecting more data. The measuring log volume was particularly challenging. Of course, charcoal's easier, it's just simply smaller. And it was very difficult to imagine usual amounts for small timescales. We noticed this in a similar project in Zambia, a pilot project. We're looking at wild food collection. If you ask someone, how much do you eat on average every day? It's very difficult for someone, all of us, to estimate the average of something even over a week, when we might use a lot one day and a little another day. So it might be easier to ask respondents to make estimates for larger timeframes and then to divide for them. The interview and the weighing took only 45 minutes, so it is something that could be incorporated into existing surveys, but it's not fast. If you were to do a subsample of questions and all questions and a subsample of weighing, one could reduce the time for quite a few of those surveys. For those households that weighed and estimated, it generated confusion why we were doing both. And we still need better information. It was also mentioned in the introduction on the amount of wood used to make charcoal. So we can quantify the charcoal, we can quantify the wood used at the household level, but understanding how much wood was used to produce the charcoal at the household level is difficult. And of course, I think when we go out and imagine all the effort to go to households, we want to get as much information as possible, and we tend to make the questions very complex, but increasing the simplicity of questions can improve the final data outcome. So I want to provide one country level example. This is a project that I was not involved with at all. I read about it and was quite impressed. This is a project in Uganda. They had, like many large projects, they had many, many objectives. And we're just going to focus on the 3 here in the bottom in darker font. So they wanted to estimate the amount of charcoal produced in different regions in Uganda. They also wanted to estimate the charcoal consumed in Kampala and other big cities, and estimate the total and per capita consumption of charcoal and fuel wood in Kampala. So we'll talk about this, these second estimates after we talk about the household survey. Now we can think about planning the sampling design. And there is no single recipe that works for all projects. We can only talk a bit about some guidelines, which we are discussing, some key questions, I'm going to touch on those later, and a few basic statistical principles. The first question we need to ask is, what is the target population? The sampling plan has to be designed for a very specific target population. It's very important to specify this at the start. And in this project, they quite clearly stated, it's all households and institutions in Uganda. And I'm just going to talk about the household sampling. Seems that is somehow easier because we intuitively know more about houses, and the industrial or business components tend to be more clustered and scattered in different areas. When the sampling, the target population is all households, there's often many sampling stages. In this project, they had a multi-sampling approach that involved 3 different steps. And at each step, they chose the sample randomly. So they started with their existing districts. They randomly selected enumeration areas from within those districts, and they randomly selected households from within those enumeration areas. And this principle of random is really important. It does not mean by chance. It's very important to ask when you're commissioning a survey, how will they choose the random sample? So this is a picture of our project in Zambia. This is the village chief randomly selecting households by simply using slips of paper in a bag. And I provide that here because it's important to understand that this is, without random sampling, we really cannot expand our estimates up. We don't know if they're biased. And it may seem complicated to achieve random sampling, but it's actually incredibly simple. It can be done on a computer, but it can be done in a very straightforward way with just simply a bag and some slips of paper. So without using a random sample, it's very easy to create biased estimates. And the goal of a random sample, the definition is that each element, in this case, each household in Uganda, had an equal chance of being selected in the survey. This is our second sample, our second survey. And I just want to show you that different types of information can be collected. For example, they looked at whether production and consumption occurred at home or away from home. And they also looked at wood acquired through bartering or in-kind trade. So here's the results. And it's really fun to look through these results. We can discuss them for a few minutes. Since the data were collected with a stratified sample with those different, a random sample inside of each district, they were able to provide disaggregated data on the national level with each row as one district. And because of this, we can see, for example, that production is highest in the second central district, and it's also particularly high in the mid-northern district. This is the kind of information that when we've talked to decision makers across a wide variety of countries, they want this kind of information in order to start to design policies. Another thing to note is that they describe the standard error or the uncertainty in their estimates, and they provide a confidence interval. So this standard error gives an idea of the variability of the underlying data and how certain we are of the final estimate. So we can see here that the central one and the mid-northern region had the highest variability in responses and therefore the largest standard errors. And if we understand this, it can tell us that maybe in the future we should increase the sampling intensity. It could provide a more precise estimate, particularly in these strata. It could also help us understand what's going on in this strata. Maybe something's quite different, because some households are using so much more wood fuel than other households. So perhaps there's policies already in place that are driving those changes. And the confidence intervals, I love confidence intervals. I'm very pleased that they describe these. And it really gives us a reminder of how difficult it is to create very precise estimates. And it helps, if we do it right, which we'll talk about, it can help policymakers make the best decisions based on the data at hand. So if we look here at the Central 1 region, they estimated about 100,000 metric tons of wood fuel produced, but their confidence interval goes from 6,000 to almost 200,000. So it means that this is a direct result of that high standard error or that high variability, but it means that policymakers need to be aware of the different possibilities, that this estimate of about 100,000 is only one. And it suggests that we need better information in the future. So in my experience, people think that if you include this confidence interval or this estimate of uncertainty, it may be perceived as poor data, but in fact, it's not true. It's exactly the opposite, that the strongest data, the strongest information has with it these estimates of uncertainty that help people know how to best use these data and how to improve that data in the future. So if we remember the very early goals, they also wanted to capture per capita estimates. And we know that population sizes in these regions are very different. So it might have been useful to divide by those population sizes and provide per capita estimates, which could help us understand these regional trends and give a clearer comparison between the subregions with different population sizes. So some projects, including this one, also use traffic surveys. These are a way of estimating the production in a particular forest, from a particular forest, or the consumption in a particular city. And this project wanted to quantify consumption in large cities, and so they used this traffic survey. Other projects have used them specifically for forestry-related activities. These are really quite inexpensive and quite fast. They're very good at understanding consumption in cities, which can be very difficult or expensive to survey house to house. And it can also be very difficult to find this information on what's coming out of a forest any other way. So the advantage is that they're fast, but it can be very difficult or impossible to extrapolate to other times, as opposed to when the survey was actually done, to other cities, or to create estimates by household. So they have their advantages and their disadvantages. And I want to take a minute to mention the possibility of using remotely sensed data. This is a project in Somalia looking at illegal charcoal kilns. I think the future will be in using more and more remotely sensed data to estimate various features on the ground. But even this project, another project I know of quite well in Zambia, it still requires very detailed field surveys to understand the forest conditions associated with different types of kilns. So while this data is coming along, it's not going to be a free pass where we have tons and tons of data without having to go on the ground and calibrate it. So I have 3 sections to sort of wrap up that are a bit more on statistical principles. The first is just a review of some of the key questions you want to ask yourself at the beginning of a survey. You want to make sure that you ask yourself if you know, or if the person doing the survey or the agency doing the survey, or again, when you're using data and trying to build policies on it, do you know what is the population of interest? How many households were surveyed? That gives you an idea of how much you should confidence you should have in those estimates, or how much samples you're going to, how many households you'll need in your sample. Are there strata, and what strata are necessary? The strata are really important when we expect consumption of wood fuel to vary systematically from one region to another, perhaps for religious, cultural reasons, dietary preferences, changes in forests. We might also expect consumption to vary systematically across climate zones. So for example, elevation, we might expect higher elevation areas within a country to need more wood fuel for heating. And we need to understand the survey itself. Is it going to be very simple and fast to complete, or are we going to try to collect more detailed information? It gives us these kind of trade-offs, and we should never forget random selection, very important. But precision versus cost, precision versus variability, and more houses, less information per house, or more information for each house. When we talk about defining the question, it's a very important step in designing or understanding those data. And my experience even quite well-known experts forget this step. We all presume that we read into the question the same information from one person to the next. So here's an example. What I would ask, do you think this is a very well-defined question? What quantity of wood energy is produced in region X? It does appear on the surface to be very clear and very well produced, and in my observation, it is not at all. So all the critical details have yet to be defined. So when we just say quantity, we need to know, what are the units? Are you talking about volume, weight, energy equivalents? We say wood fuel. What do you mean? You mean wood fuel? You mean biofuels? All? Do you mean wood charcoal? Do you mean the wood that goes to produce wood charcoal? Are you talking about the whole season, only the heating season, only a particular season, formal, informal, legal, illegal? Do we need disaggregated data? And finally, something that's really hung us up recently, it seems so simple, but do we mean wood produced in the region from wood that grew anywhere? Or do we mean wood that grew anywhere, but the product, such as wood fuel, was produced somewhere else? So this information needs to be agreed on at the beginning and then communicated with the final result. So let's go to this last section on communication of uncertainty, which is one of my favorite topics. Uncertainty is information. There's so much unquantified information, and there's guidance, for example, from the IPCC, that we need to identify and quantify those uncertainties. Statisticians and people using data, people communicating data, have an essential role in moving that conversation forward from uncertainty is a problem or something to be hidden to uncertainty is important information that we can leverage to make better policy decisions. So we often feel there's some pressure to be very precise or to ignore uncertainty. So to give a number, let's go back to Uganda and remember that they had a really cool number. They had 2,144,338 metric tons of wood fuel produced in a year. And often policymakers think that's all they want. They just want this number. But the study went a bit further. They provided a confidence interval. And as a statistician, we know that what this confidence interval represents is it's just a random interval with a 95% chance of covering the true estimate. Statisticians tend to stop there. And I would argue that politicians hate this. They don't know what to do with it. And they just shake it off and they use that one number. So what we can do as data producers is to look at this underlying distribution that the confidence interval was built on. And if we don't know it, we can even rebuild it from that standard error that was in the data. This gives us an idea of all the different values. This is the best estimate we have, but we know that if there have been certain kinds of different sample collected, it might have been a little lower, a little higher. If people had answered on a slightly different day, it might have been a little higher or a little lower. And it's unlikely, but if both those things had happened, we might have much lower, much higher values. And if we remember this, we can start to provide really cool information to policymakers. For example, we know usually what's the average wood fuel production for the past 10 years. Without uncertainty, we'd say, our estimate for this year, it's higher. But with uncertainty, we could tell policymaker, actually, there's a 42% chance that production this year has decreased compared to the average of the past 10 years. It's maybe more likely that it increased, but it's still really quite possible that it decreased. You need to take that possibility into account when you design policies. We can share with them that there is, for example, what are the odds, the chance that production is astronomically large? Do we need to have some policies that take this possibility into account? And we can compare the estimates that we have that are all possible to estimates, for example, across the region, similar countries in our region, and provide an estimate to policymakers of whether we are likely to have the same patterns or whether our estimate, for example, is quite high or low compared to what's found in other countries. So I've given you a bit on what FAO collects and ideas for where and how to best get more data. And I hope a little inspiration for the value of a well-designed household survey. I hope we have more and more in the future. And I turn it over now to my colleague, Suzanne Xia, with a long history of experience in wood energy. And I'll keep sharing your slides, Xia.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
And see me as well. Hello, good morning. It's really nice to have a chance just to introduce some of FAO's work on wood energy. As Ashley just introduced, FAO has been working on wood energy issues for more than 50 years, so engaged in a lot of activities. Ashley, would you please just for the next slide? Yeah, well, in addition to those kind of statistical work or normative work, there is also a support of field projects in different countries and different regions. I just pick up a few projects, just show you that the wood energy project can be a complex issue, can take a long time, and a lot of project funding. For example, some of the major projects in Africa, including the wood energy project in Sudan, which across more than 10 years and almost $20 million project funding. And also in Latin America, there's also a project about wood energy for plantation for wood energy. It's about $16 million before 2000. It's a large funding by that time. And for Asia, there is a program that covers 16 countries, also more than 10 million from the Dutch government. There's many other projects completed, some are big, some are small. I could not just make a long list, but let's just mention some of the ongoing projects. There's several ongoing projects with a big funding, like the forest management and the sustainable charcoal value chain in Uganda. This is an ongoing project with funding from the European Union, and in the next 4 years. Also, a project in the pipelines almost secured. It's just strengthening the potential of a sustainable wood energy project in the Republic of Congo, and in the coming 5 years. Next slide, please. Well, the project itself, is not really a highlight for me. Today, I would like, just introduce to you a new platform for information and knowledge sharing, which I think may make better sense, and to see how this may help you, how you can help us. What is the new platform for the wood energy? We call it the Wood Energy Catalog. It is already online in our website called FAO.org/forestry/energy/catalog. So this catalog is an online database and primarily designed for information and knowledge sharing on wood energy in developing countries. So it focuses on different kinds of what are the relevant policies, regulations, strategies relevant to wood energy in different countries. What are the interventions either completed in the past or ongoing or planned interventions? So from technical point of view, it will cover the wood fuel production, conversion, or the distribution, consumption, or the overall value chain of the wood fuel. Also cover their impact, the social, environment, or economic impact of wood fuel. So this is quite broad. The most important feature of a database is it is searchable. It must be searchable. You can find the information, otherwise it does not make much sense. So for this database, you can search by country. This is likely most popular. People just trying to search what happened with what is included in the database for our country, and also by region, by the type of initiative, by the level of intervention at the global, regional, and the national, or who is implementing this, what are the funding sources, what is the funding size. What you can also use the keyword, the free text, but this information not all available, but we made it searchable just in case this information available to keep you easy to remember this, and also make a short your website link to this information in this website, which is tiny.cc and wood energy. Next slide, please, Ashley. So why we need a wood energy catalog? Why it makes sense for us? And all of us know that, I believe all of them know that there is already a wide variety of initiatives and interventions relevant to wood energy in our country, in some other countries, in some other regions. But to find this information is not easy because the study findings, the project result are scattered here and there. Some of that is just readily available online. You can search by internet, but not always. So it takes time and takes effort just trying to find the relevant information you would like. So this has led to the inefficient use of our limited resources in terms of money and time. I mean, we may observe that some similar effort has been making in different countries. All the similar effort have just in the same country, just over different time, or different agencies are doing similar work in different country, or even in the same country. So the objective of this catalog is just to help the stakeholders to find relevant information, so to save their time, to save their effort. This may including the policymakers, the project developers, project practitioners, or even the donor agencies, and to some extent the researchers as well. But it's not really an academic focus, it's more a project or practice focus. The next slide, please. So how this database works? Firstly, it is open accessible. Anyone have an internet connection can access this. So there is a manual and also the instructions, the guidelines in 6 UN official languages. Most popular in English, French, and Spanish, and as well as some other 3. So there's 2 categories of users. The one is that the general users, whoever wanted to browse this website, want to search information, we just refer it to as the general user. And also the registered users. Registered users just register in the system, so that if you want to contribute some content to the database for information sharing. Of course, this is subject to review and approval. As a site, you can search by the multiple criteria, by country, by region, by initiatives, intervention, and all these kind of different ways of search the information. And you may also search in a particular field or a combination of different fields. Or after you just click the search, you will find a list of these topics underneath, and you click on the title. There is a new window pop up. You find the detailed information. So I give you some search examples in the right hand of the box. If you can search by Africa, but I want to mention that the region we are using just following FAO classification of region. Like for Africa, it's referred to the sub-Saharan Africa, because there's another region called the Near East and the North Africa. So it's a little bit tricky. If you want to find some information about, say Morocco or Algeria or Egypt, you may not find it in Africa region, but in the Northeast and Near East and North Africa region. But you get used to it, you'll find it. And so you search for a region, you will find the record of the regional project only. It may not necessarily cover each country under the region. And if you want to find the country, you just specify the country. So you search by country. For example, you can search, you just first select Africa and you select Angola, and you find all the information available in the database about Angola. And similar to from Angola to Zambia, any country you can do it. And you can also select multiple countries like Cameroon and Uganda. I mean, all these 2 countries relevant record will be displayed. of course, it's also important to have a search function for free text. For free text and the keywords, you just search the whole database to find whatever relevant record and it will display it. So if you search by keyword, the keyword just provided by the administrator when just key in input make this kind of record. So we must have some kind of review to see this is a keyword. I mean, not necessarily. Well, I mean, in a free text search, it may not be necessarily cover this, but the free text is more broader. Any words you search in the text will be displayed, but if you search the keyword, it may not be there because the keyword is much narrower. And you can also search by a combination of fields, like different kind of initiative, the strategy or action plan in Africa, or at regional level. Or you can search this kind work plan in Malawi at a regional or a national or the multiple country level, wherever is possible ways you search. Next, please. So how this may help you? I think one of the most useful feature to me is that you may search relevant information about the country of interest. You may search about what is available for your country. You may search about what is happening on the same subject in some other countries, like the charcoal conversion, the charcoal kiln, the plantation, wood plantation for charcoal. What happened on this subject in some other countries. And also, you may upload the information about your country for easy access of yourself and your colleagues and share with some others. I mean, it's not always easy to have a reliable platform to upload the information. You upload the information and maybe several months or several years later, it's gone, nowhere. But the FAO have a professional team maintaining this kind of database. If you upload this information, you can have access anywhere. If you have internet connection, you can share with your colleagues, share with others as well. And also this database links to some other relevant databases as all the information portals for you to just easily search information, like the World Energy Outlooks of the IEA in the past years of relevant information. Also the tracking SDG 7 by the World Bank, IEA, International Renewable Energy Agency, USD, and WHO. And sustainable energy for all regional hubs and country hubs. All those kind of relevant information. Africa Regional Portal, and also the Clean Cooking Alliance database. And of course, forestry, as Ashley just mentioned. So this catalog is an ongoing and also an open-ended process. I mean, right now the coverage of this is still very limited, but we have better weather coverage, and we expect people to help us. Now, how can you help? First, you can review the current version. It is a test run version, and still have some problems. We identify some problems. It's under the test run right now. We need to know what are the problems, have a long list and modify it. So we can provide some comments or suggestions how to improve this product. And you may register yourself, contribute records for information sharing. And by some time, we will acknowledge the contributors, the list of contributors who have contributed to the database. And you may also invite the colleagues to contribute to the database and make comments. And time-wise, I need to stop. Otherwise, we have. I will not have a chance to show you how to. This is self-explanatory. It's pretty straightforward. Just take a look and let us know if you have any comments and suggestions. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashley and Sha, for the very insightful presentation. I think that the participants like me would, I found it very interesting looking at the different surveys, what type of questions are pertinent when doing a surveys. And also the online database and catalog is very, very useful to countries. For the participants, if you have any questions, you can write it down in the question and answer box, and we will be happy to answer you. We already have one comment from Ghana about metric tons. So it's true that we commonly use metric ton, which is the same as ton for us. I don't know if Ashley, you want to say something on that, but
only to say that as an American, sometimes we have to be more careful because Americans are terrible with this. But thank you for the comment.
Yeah, and we have another question from Rafael Shinda about what impact does the wood energy has on the environment. So I don't know, Ashley, if you want to say something, I can start as well as you want.
I can say that in some cases we don't know, which is of course why we need more data and information, but I think it can have many different impacts. So when wood is just collected under the ground, maybe it has, and for a low density is coming out, it can have a very low impact on the environment. Or where we have a plantation forest and there's already production of wood products under a sustainable mechanism, and then you have chips and other byproducts, it can be a way of using products that would otherwise go to waste and even substituting for more energy intensive products. However, where you have, for example, on the far extreme, a protected forest, and maybe it has unique biodiversity traits, and we are talking about illegal charcoal production at a mass scale from inside, which we have also observed. This has a massively destructive impact on the environment. And I believe this is one of these issues. I started with those pictures, even though I know everyone in this webinar has experience with wood energy, because it's a very confusing idea that sometimes wood energy is the most sustainable solution, and sometimes it is a destructive solution. And by simply quantifying it, we don't have a way of also explaining that yet.
Yes, indeed, as Ashley said, if the wood is cut in a sustainable way, then there's an equilibrium. But if the wood is, if you cut too much wood and we cut too many trees, then the amount of CO2 that is released from burning of the wood, it will increase drastically, and at the same time the forest will diminish. So there's then you have a disequilibrium, and we will end up with a positive net emissions as well, so which is bad for the climate. There's another question from Mr. David. Does the database open for all users with our registration?
The answer is yes. It is open to all the users without registration. The registration just enables you to contribute to the database.
Thank you. So there's no other questions, so please do not hesitate to take this opportunity of having Ashley and Shao with us today to ask any questions you may have. Anyway, even after this event, you can contact us and Ashley as well with any questions, and we will be happy to support you on this. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate. The video, we are also recording this event, so we will be putting it on YouTube so that you can also watch it after in more details. There was a lot of information, and Shai explained to us very in a lot of detail how to access the different platforms, which then we can try to test and see. No questions? People want more.
Thank you very much for this. There's a question in the chat that there should be a continuation, which I appreciate. I would be interested also in the Q&A or in the chat just to hear from participants who are currently planning to collect more data or have the ambition to collect more data. I mean, there's a an ambition and then there's funding and a plan, but even the ambition to collect more data, because understanding this community of people who are interested in having more data available on collection and consumption can help us connect together in the future.
I see a question, comment that Shah and Ashley presentation seems incomplete. Will there be a continuation? This is an interesting comment because this is a very interesting topic and it takes a lot of time. Now we only have less than 1 hour, and it will be difficult for us to really expand the coverage of this topic. But hopefully we have a chance later on to just further expand this.
Yes, we will be happy to organize another session later on, maybe in autumn, on a follow-up on the topic. It's true that in September, probably we will be organizing one with to present the work the IEA is doing on building a model on estimating biofuel consumption, and maybe then we can also do some more follow-up with FAO.
Yes, in this case, our model might also be finished, which I think is going to be a very complementary approach. And one more comment, if I can, just because FAO is collecting this information through the Joint Forest Sector Questionnaire, and there may be some members of the audience who know the person in their office who supplies this information through the Joint Forest Sector Questionnaire, or if you know that you have not received this questionnaire, then please contact the FAO office in your country. So the more we can have the best data from countries, the more the database we provide out globally is improved. So this outreach and mutual sharing of information is essential. Thank you.
We have a few more minutes left before the end of this event. Please, if you have any more questions, don't hesitate. We will also be putting the presentation online as well with the video, so you can have access to both information. No more questions, then I think we will close up the event here now. So thank you very much, Ashley and Shah, for joining today and taking the time to present to us all the great work that FAO is doing. I was quite impressed myself. And thank you to all the participants who have joined, and we will meet again in September for the next IEA Africa University event. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
There's one, before we close, there's one question that arrived, and if we can answer, that would be great. Can individuals with project ideas on this be helped with funds to carry out such surveys?
We at the moment don't have funding for surveys, but we are happy to support countries in identifying funds and seeing where we can find funds. I think the partnership is more likely to bring funds, so happy to support that. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Goodbye. Ciao.